Welcome to By the Well podcast, produced by the community at Wall Street United Methodist Church in Jeffersonville, Indiana. We focus on clarity, compassion, and community. You will hear sermons as well as conversations around the intersections of faith and life. If you enjoy this podcast, like and share below.
Our New Testament reading today is from Revelation 22, verses 1 through 5. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Nothing accursed will be found there anymore, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And there will be no more night. They need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. Today we'll be reading from the book of John 5, verses 1 through 9. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool, called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many ill, blind, lame, and paralyzed people. One man who was there, who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The ill man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath. The word of God for the people of God.
Here we go, one more time, friends. I am grateful to be part of the Living into Freedom series as we've looked at such a big variety of freedoms already, and there's more to come. These freedoms are tricky because there's always a choice and a risk to the freedoms that we've mentioned. Pastor Kathy's guided us around themes of freedom like doubt, to follow, to rise again, and to love. Today we explore that tricky, difficult freedom to heal. The readings we just heard Bethany offer give us important parts to healing stories, and the question of the putting together of the two texts offers us a question: what kind of city, what kind of water are we going to, what kind of healing are we trusting? Now there's many visions of cities. The early church had lots of urban context. I think often, because we're so far removed historically from this, we think of it as a very, very rural context. But there were cities all over the place. Cities planted by rivers and developed in ways that looked like brand new worlds to the people that lived in them. Now, you may think you're far removed from that too, but when I came here, I was gifted a book and a whole bunch of things around Jeff, right? Here's what it's like to be here. Here's what the cinnamon tastes like at Shemp's, right? Here's how to pronounce Shemp's. Right. And one thing that was a repeated refrain for many of you when I came here was, you came at a great time because you should have seen us 8 or 10 years ago. It was a different place. It was harder. The city's really poured time and effort into things. We've been through a lot, was the refrain, right? Not just in this house of God, but in the city itself, right? So you know what it's like to be close to a body of water, to see ups and downs of things. what it looks like to be in seemingly different cities altogether, but you didn't move. Cities involve power. Let's not be silly about that. They need things from the people that live there. When's the last time you considered, when reading your Bible, the amount of times that taxes are mentioned in the New Testament? It's pretty often. Jesus, in fact, talks more about money than a lot of things in the New Testament. Or what about this massive collection of data system, right? If you look at Luke 2, there's a huge emphasis on they're trying to get to registration, right? Cities, metroplexes, metropolises, all of these take effort and time and power. Now, with power comes all sorts of things, like porticos with beautiful waterways. Cities have resources that lie in the hands of some and over and possibly against others. This was true in Jesus' day. This is true in our own day. And it's worth considering how the man in John's gospel reading was a victim of this kind of successful, prosperous new city, new world. 38 years waiting for a miracle. Suffering that, according to just 5 verses, now we didn't read before Bethany, we didn't read after, right? But just taking those 5, it seems silly. It seems like 38 years of suffering is too much, because all that someone had to do was just come with me. I'll get you there first. It seems almost like a painful story. And in fact, if you read the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, some of you read the text and thought, for my scholars in the room, you're missing a part. There's a part that says, in a lot of older texts, that there was an angel that would come and put their finger in the water and stir the waters. The NRSV, in their wisdom, took that out because they recognized that section was put in later to explain this tragic story. There was a folk narrative that came around. This must have been what happened. It was a one ticket to Charlie's Chocolate Factory, right? One winner every day. And that was difficult for the early church to read. And so the NRSV uses it as a footnote. And as you know, Harley loves footnotes. So I'm glad they didn't get rid of it. But I think it's smart because it decenters what could easily be a debate about Jesus' power versus this angel with the finger in the water stirring the waters, right? It displaces that entire conversation. But what does it center? Jesus asks what seems to be an absurd question of the man who has spent his whole 38 years of energy and time to place himself in the way of healing, in the path toward healing. Jesus asks, do you want to be healed? And, rightly so, the man says, Sir, it feels very Charlie Brown. Sir. I read it for years as a place of like, well, sir, let me tell you. This is, and you can disagree with me on this. You can disagree with me on anything, really. I read it as a directness. The man is like, what do you think I've been doing here this whole time? In fact, he doesn't just say, sir. He says, I have no one to carry me. I make my way in whatever way I can, and someone steps over me ahead of me. Sir. Now this is Jesus he's talking to. Jesus' response to this echoing in the man's mind. I imagine this man has said those things to many other people. Because it's not a modern concept that someone says, well, why don't you just do what you got to do to get where you got to get? That's not new. People have been saying that for all time. Jesus offers that when you're in the presence of need, participation is the Christian response. Jesus' response has nothing to do with faith. This isn't a faith healing story. In fact, it gets worse than that, y'all. The man quickly stands up, grabs his mat, When I was writing this, I was tempted to call him Matt because that's funny, but I didn't do that. Lily will cut that part out. The man quickly gets up and he goes on his way, and he immediately meets interrogation. He's challenged on his own healing. What does he do? He says, I didn't do it. This man walked up to me, and he said, stand and walk. So I stood, and I walked. Don't get mad at me. Get mad at that. Well, they said, who is this person if you keep reading the story? I don't know. The healed man didn't even ask who the man was that healed him. Now, why? The man is taking the time, and it's appropriate to consider at least some of the reasons. He starts to side with the authorities and trying to find out who this mystery man was that would have him do something so terrible as to carry a mat on the Sabbath. So there are all kinds of ways to take this story. I'm indebted to Elizabeth Johnson, a theologian who identifies the difficulty of the man who essentially sells out Jesus after the healing. John includes a story that has nothing to do with the faith of the man, and it has a simple question of why was he overlooked. It's not an unfair question, friends, as we read this story, to say, but was it worth it? I mean, this just added to the con list of people coming after Jesus. It added to his own pain. But if we start weighing out who deserves and doesn't deserve healing, then we have a calculator to depend on and not a God. So thanks be to God that God is not a calculator weighing and measuring miracles and their value. Jesus throws whatever math might have been regular at the time into absolute chaos because he is doing healing simply because it's the business God has him to do. Friends, it's so easy for us to take too much time thinking about it, because when I do, I can talk myself out of blessing someone as I consider some kind of qualifier. Now, before we judge the man who turned coat immediately and found the authorities and told them, that guy, let's be honest with ourselves. If we had spent 38 years in deep suffering for the largest portion of your life, awaiting healing and being bypassed, overlooked, ignored, or even had violence against you, and then you were immediately healed, I don't think the immediate response would necessarily be gratitude or discipleship. Right? This man doesn't become a disciple of Jesus. I think that probably one of the responses that's fair is survival. And he is in the witness of a city that says the people that survive are the powerful people. The same world that produced the competitive healing games of that pool are in power. So healing is one thing, wholeness is another thing. His going to the authorities about disobedience, he's weighing his immediate needs, and honestly, it works better in the long run if he sides with the authorities than this itinerant preacher who walked by and healed him and then kept going. That sounds kind of messy, doesn't it? One of the gifts of Christianity is that, let me rephrase that. One of the gifts of the Bible, the gifts of the Hebrew Bible, the gifts of the Christian scriptures is we don't take out all the hard parts. You can go to seminary and learn some of that, but we include a lot of difficult narratives because it's important to know that this happens in real life. You know, healing and things happens in real time. So remember in the beginning of this, I said that freedom includes choice and risk. Right? This is that raw, unvarnished version in John's gospel. Jesus didn't have a lot of risk. He was simply doing what God asked of him to heal the man. The man had a lot of risk to pick up that mat and walk. He knew what day it was. He knew who was around just outside of that pool area. We make decisions and risk and choice all the time, especially with our freedom. And thankfully, in all the wisdom of the lectionary, we are not left with just this image. And so I want to close with what I think is a really good connection of two texts that seem to be very, very far apart. There is another city in mind for another John who's in exile by the same empire that built the competition game at the pool. John is on the island of Patmos, and he sees a city with a garden right in the middle of it, with life flourishing all around. Its features probably reminded the readers, of Revelation, of the cities of Rome, but there were differences. See, the empire built cities that required competition. Thank goodness we've gotten away from competition as a rule for living in a city. I sensed a few people catching my sarcasm. This city that John envisions isn't owned by anyone. It's curated like a good gardener by God's own self. And those closest to God participate in that curation. So let's look at the vision a little bit and consider ways it's different than the city of Bethzatha. What was the river like? The river is crystal clear. There's no pollution. The waters in the river are life-giving. There's flourishing in the river, and it's giving life to the people around it. It's located in the middle of the city. You don't have to travel to get there. There are trees on both sides of the river. One was not bulldozed, let's say, for, buildings or something. The trees produce fruit. They're not decorative. They are in season every 12 months. There is sustenance enough for everyone in this city. Different types of fruit. There's diversity in the city. Its fruit is for the healing of the nations. Now, I considered doing the entire sermon based around what this word nations means, but it's my last time, so I had to kind of chop it up, right? The fruit for the healing of the nations. What does nations mean? Notice the people that are pruning the trees, the people that are taking care of the city, the people that are closest to God. It seems, if you read it quickly, like they're the ones in power. But I would imagine they're the ones with soil on their hands, getting dirty, making sure that everything looks good. They're servants. Friends, when we follow Jesus, we become servants of one another. The nations are everyone. The enemies of God and the friends of God. It is all nations. One of the beautiful moments of this is where it says, nothing cursed is there. There's no more night. God is the light of the world. So we see one river with the man standing by it for 38 years, constantly available for healing. It wasn't like he just went by every 2 minutes to see if maybe he had a chance. This river, built by empire and power, centering a competitive nature, produces the things that it seeks to produce. This is the bare bones sermon by Jesus, right? A tree produces fruit. It's very simple. I love when Jesus is very there it is. So if you build a competitive nature, that's what you're going to produce. But then John, in exile, in a state of suffering, sees a different city. A city that is similar to the prophets of old that he knew about, that would be calling us toward a different world. A river of life, unpolluted by corruption or toxins. Fruit in its season that will sustain the world and not be abused by marketing or malnourished soil. And God, who gives creation, even the sun, its due rest. Before we get too happy about this beautiful vision, I want us to consider those visions of John might have had in mind, because it's easy to think about the garden of the city and healing when we jump to the end as really, really happy. But like Isaiah, I think John was looking more like Isaiah did. And we know Isaiah's famous line because of people like Reverend Dr. King, where swords will be turned into plowshares. We will study war no more, and the nations will be taught by God, right? This is the vision of God. People will be coming together. But the risk of these texts is often that we're so far removed from that kind of city. We're so far removed from the biblical world that we can forget that call is for us today. That call to swords being forged into new shovels and new tools for restoration. So there's a needed reminder for me as I think about the last time I'm here, that those swords that were turned into plowshares, they weren't brand new. They didn't go to Costco and buy like a flat of swords and then hire a friend who was a blacksmith. These were bloodied, messy weapons. These were the tools of empire. These were the hard things that caused harm and were used for harm. The prophet Isaiah said these bloodied swords would mix human iron with fire and sweat of this hammer and make them into new things. This is the call of Jesus, to not just imagine forward, but to physically do things. See, compassion and empathy and Christian discipleship are sharp tools for healing. They're not always soft and tender. And the garden, the city of God, reminds us that there's work to be done. It's not automatic, friends. And you know that so well. You know that today the prophet might inquire us to take the weapons that we've used or the weapons that have been used against us and transform them into tools of healing. You know, because I've seen you do it. What would the prophet require us but have the same guns that take the lives of our children be beaten into weapons of healing? Those weapons being beaten into tools for healing. This imagination made practical is one of the most important things that I've learned about being a Methodist. It's one of the most important things I've learned from you all. As the creation keepers imagined a new world and hundreds of pounds of plastic and recycling was displayed here to reimagine what a prayer space looks like. As you go to schools and reorganize the entire rooms full of books and discarded materials and clean it all up. As children who have accidents in school have fresh, clean clothes to change into without necessarily ever knowing the names of the people that did that. As you come every Sunday, you are taking tools that easily have been used for other means and transforming the world. Transformation, to wrap up, can also look like rest. So don't hear me saying, work harder, 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 friends. Hear me saying, you also deserve rest. Transformation often looks like a pillow and some time. See, rest is a type of healing. What does it mean that God gives the sun rest? Did you catch that part? Verse 5 in John's vision. It essentially imagines God saying this, brother, son, thank you for living, thank you for giving life for billions of years, but you can rest now. That same rest is given to the trees who are not subject to the wrath of poisons and pesticides. It says safety will come. They're safe again. You are safe again. You are not alone again. We are not abandoned by creation, but we are cared for by it and care for others with it. Today's message, this series, is not just about these action words. It's easy to gather them up like a to-do list. Doubt, follow, believe, trust, rise up, love, heal. No, it's about the difficult freedom of it all. We are free always to walk past the person needing our presence and our participation for their story, like so many others before Jesus arrived that day in John's reading. We're free to continue a narrative that there's no turning back from human destruction, war, ecological crime, sin, and death. We can continue that story, and we're free to heal. We're free to be healed and to heal others, to risk the vows that we profess to resist evil in the face of it. This requires healing even those that would be called our enemies. Every year, for a whole season of Sundays, we proclaim that death is part of our lives, but it is not the master of our lives. We, along with our neighbors in Christian practice, proclaim that we are a people who serve a Jesus who refused to other the marginalized, who repented when culture overtook his own empathy, and who called each of us friends. Every year, We commit ourselves to baptismal vows, remembering to resist evil, accept God's power, and trust that we are moving toward wholeness. Perhaps for the last time, but only perhaps, friends. It's important for me to remind you that Wesley never let his pen dry from the words, love God and neighbor without adding enemies. This was his Christian perfection, to accept your freedom to live in a world where trees produce healing, where weapons are transformed into tools of nourishment, and where the light of the world could even give creation rest. Wall Street, friends of Jesus, you are healers in the world, and at times you are in need of healing. Accept that. Look for it. Participate. Be with one another. And I want to thank you for healing me. I still have the rock that's worn down from someone's pocket as they prayed through my surgery. You are a praying people, and we see healing happen and wholeness coming about. May we move forward with the willingness of people trusting that the eyes of compassion and empathy will lift us up. Teach us to have those same eyes for others, and may we see the world full of nourishment, healing, hope, and more. Amen.
You have been listening to By the Well podcast from Wall Street United Methodist Church. Thank you for being a part of our community. As a reminder, visit us at wallstreetumc.org, and we invite you to like and share our podcast wherever you are listening.